Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about the implementation of zero trust architecture, and I'm going to go over to you, Paul, and give us an example of a program that you've snapped in a piece of the zero trust architecture, if you will, over there at CDC.
I would really have to point to, our privileged access management efforts. These things work when you have folks who understand the complexities of what that means. It brings the elements of separation of duties and least privilege, which are so critical in defending against an adversary. But our program is really advanced past just managing an Active Directory, but installing technology so that when we grant access, there's a lot of administrative and technical checks that are along the way to make sure that you're granted access to a use case or need that you need to with elevated privileges. So we go through those checks, and before we grant that, we cycle your credentials, your username and password every time that you use those. We throw them in the trash. And then we watch them and make sure that those folks who are using those elevated privileges are staying where they should be. Are they in the building that they should be? Are they working during the times that they should be? Are they trying to give themselves more privileges? Those things set off alarm bells that make us all go running, and we're constantly looking. And we added to that over the holidays when we were working through the Christmas and New Year's times, looking at the Office 365 and the Exchange challenges we had, looking at those logs from what's going on in our cloud and our Exchange environments. So we continue to evolve that, and we're just going to continue moving that out to all programs, out to a mobile device and into the cloud. That is so critical for making sure that people only have the privilege they need for the job that they're doing, and then we make sure it doesn't change unless we actually make that change.
Absolutely. Keeping current is really a critical part of that. Kevin, let's go over to you at NSA, recognizing the directorate you're in. Perhaps you can't cite a specific program, but maybe you can talk to us about the steps and strategies you're advising others to use in regards to some of those programs.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So my team is externally focused. So we're focused on customers, and in our effort to learn and help customers get to zero trust, we see a number of different examples, and we've worked with a number of different partners along the way, and we've seen those efforts that work well and get up to speed quickly, and those that don't. I would say that one of the attributes of a successful zero trust program is really getting that full buy-in from the senior leaders of the organization, all the way down to those engineers, the architects, the administrators, the implementers of the capabilities themselves. When we see that, things roll pretty quickly. When we don't see that, it's not that the organizations don't come around to recognizing the value of zero trust, but it slows things down a lot. So that's an attribute of a successful program. Make sure you've got that full support of the organization, buying in to begin with, and that's fantastic. This is a paradigm change, right? So we need to make sure that people aren't just saying, sure, I'm doing some zero trust, and I know that I got to worry about users and devices and whether or not those devices are able to access resources, but accepting that an adversary is assumed in the network. You really need to have that there in order to drive change, in order to drive those, as Mr. Morris said, those protections of those privileged accounts, and being paranoid about those. It's not paranoid. It's the way we should have been doing things for years, and that assume breach model helps us get there. So understanding that paradigm change to drive changes within your network. If you are on an open Wi-Fi coffee shop network, you're trying to secure that, how would you do that differently, right? It's a really good mental exercise to think about the capabilities that you choose. It's not about the technology either. It's about the implementation of the capabilities, about the implementation of the model itself. We've seen customers buy new products And we've seen, some military partners do it with very little cost using enterprise software licenses and capabilities successfully. So, that is fantastic, but ultimately the resources need to be there both on the people side as well as the funding side. And then I would also say this is another important point based on programs that we've seen that have been successful is methods to do validation, right? And so an example of that could be, bringing a red team in, right? So it's really great to have a red team assessment that has baselined your environment in the past, and then be able to measure your effectiveness as you start rolling out zero trust in the future to see where you're doing better. Are you shutting the red teams down, or are they still able to get around? If they are, then have them help you figure out what changes need to happen in order for you to tighten up that network.
Yeah,
we're seeing success out there with a little going a long way, right? So people start rolling out with an understood and properly implemented zero trust model. We start seeing success from those red team assessments pretty quickly.
Yeah, Devarius had talked about the education part of this and the awareness. It's almost like a culture, if you will. John, how about over at Palo Alto Networks? Can you give us an example of a program where you're seeing this work very well? Perhaps there's already some technology in place and they're just reconfiguring it to snap into the overall framework and enable a piece of the zero trust architecture.
Yeah, Luke, if you look at the direction that NIST is heading and that the EO is aligning to, I think that is a good model for a successful program. It's the right framework and it's complete. And let me just, not to insult anybody, but to go over the components of that, 3 core components: the policy enforcement point, the policy engine, and the policy administrator are those 3 core components. And then you've got to have the 4 functional components addressed. And that's the data security component, the endpoint security component, and, as we've heard so many times earlier, the identity and access management component. But don't forget about that 4th component, the security analytics component that encompasses all the threat intelligence feeds and traffic and activity monitoring for an enterprise. Gathers the security and behavior analytics about the current state of assets and continuously monitors those assets to actively respond to threats or malicious activity. So I believe that companies like Palo Alto Networks, if they're going to be a good partner in this journey, they've got to demonstrate how our capabilities align to those core and functional components.
Very important piece of it to kind of bring it all together, and a critical way of attempting to implement the various pieces and parts. Stephen, how about at Department of Education? Give us an example, if you will, of a piece of the framework or a step that you've taken, or perhaps you've got it all done, who knows, in regards to the ZTA, as we like to call it.
So I think I've said it several different ways, but I think my favorite is, this is a lifestyle. I think I'm safe in saying zero trust is the pursuit of perfection, and we will likely never get there, but we're going to pursue the hell out of it until we get as close as we can. Having said that, I think for us, one of the areas that I'd like to highlight is around what we're doing with data. And so for us, when we look at zero trust from the cybersecurity perspective, we said, the standard idea of a SIEM or even a data warehouse is not going to be sufficient for us as we look into the future, the next 5 years, 10 years, when it comes to zero trust architectures. So for us, we started almost 2 years ago building a cyber data lake. And the whole concept being that we want the native data in its raw format, accurate, thorough, timely. And if there's data out there in the environment that leads to information about cyber risk, it needs to be in our data warehouse, or our data lake, or accessible by our data lake in a data lake fabric. And so for us, what we've done is, one, we made some good architectural decisions there. One, we built it in the cloud. So extensibility and elasticity is not an issue. We throw more money at it and wow, it gets bigger. It's pretty cool how that works. But the other part is, now that we're looking at how do we then make use of all that data, we're doing some pretty cool stuff with our human skill sets as well. We're bringing on actual data scientists into, say, our security operations space, because they're going to be the ones that are going to help us train the machines later. But first, we have to have folks have a great idea of what data we have, what it looks like, where there might be nuances to that data, and then also where we need to build out, say, a data warehouse-like capability, which in our case is our SIM use case. It's effectively just a data warehouse within that data lake, that we have the right folks in the skill set to do it. And then as we bring on additional zero trust capabilities, one, they have to be able to feed into that ecosystem for data, but also they need to be able to leverage what's in that ecosystem. So really cool space right now. We call it our data dominance initiative, stealing some thunder from our friends over in the DoD side. But that message resonates. Folks get it. They're like, oh, my logs need to be in your data lake. Okay, we'll make it happen.
Right. A lot of sophisticated instrumentation there. You've got to be able to have a sophisticated way to analyze it and use it properly. Joe, how about over at Verizon? Give us an example of where you're seeing this being implemented in a fantastic way, or maybe a not so fantastic way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we have, our customers are focused on the network. A lot of them, again, are at the TIC 2.0 level, which, now they're trying to move up into protecting the cloud resources. And one of the challenges they struggle with, I think I said before, is how to get started. So we're working with them. It's really focused on, DHS and the CIS organization. Sean Conley and his team have been really good, have created some use case patterns that our customers can sort of follow, that one being the remote user. And a lot of that focuses around the classic VPN. You get access into the entire network, which is not really in the zero trust type of vein. So they're implementing more what I call application type of VPN technologies. And as many of the colleagues in the panel have mentioned, you can't do it all at once. So when we work with our customers, we're trying to do sort of the crawl, walk, run, where we do something. We got to make sure that we train and educate the users on what's going to happen, because the user experience may change. You want to make sure that they're on board, with what's going on. So, so that's successful. I also think CDM, continuous diagnosis and monitoring, now that is part of the TIC 3.0 program. I think that's really key, because now we bring the endpoint into it as well. So not only are we authenticating the user to a specific device, only give them access to that, but we're also making sure that the endpoints are all compliant, which is really key, so that we have the whole thing all integrated together. A lot of your SASE solutions now are tightly coupled, tightly integrated with your endpoint solution. So it's not this distinct technology operating independently. Now it's all integrated together.
Yeah, a lot of this technology, as it continues to mature, is snapping in a little nicer, a little tighter, as we're all sort of pointed at this framework, this architecture. Devarius, you talked about the education piece, which is really clutch. Give us an example of another piece that you've implemented there that you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we try to emphasize as a Corps of Engineers is, how do we meet the end user where they are? How do we meet that engineer at a distant insight, enabling them to be able to do their mission effectively and efficiently? Because ultimately, IT, from our perspective, is an enabler, right? So a lot of times we use a lot of technical terms, we talk a lot of technical things, but an end user says, what does this mean to me? So at the end of the day, we begin to take the conceptual aspects of zero trust and begin to operationalize that concept. So with that being said, from a DoD perspective, many are probably aware of the CVR, which is the commercial virtual remote environment that was just recently decommissioned due to the fact that we're beginning to modernize and think a little bit differently. But CVR was a great example of how we operationalize the zero trust methodology and concept, due to the fact that you have a major weapon system being that of the Microsoft Teams capability, which enables collaboration or mission collaboration to an end user through a mobile device. That means you can do your job effectively anywhere and collaborate efficiently with anybody throughout, whether that was a department or the federal space, DoD or non-DoD entities. And with that being said, being that we were in many different zones or different areas or departments, whether you were Air Force, Army, Navy, throughout DoD, you had the ability to connect with all of your partners. So that means being able to allow all, deny all, allow by exception, partitioning to allow for those that need access into their mission critical data, mission critical elements, being able to have good access to view and receive those logs and communicate externally with with vendor partners with regards to being able to secure that information as well. So that was a very good example of how we operationalize the concept of zero trust to enable the end user to effectively be able to perform their mission. And then again, we're also looking at it from the perspective of OT, because taking something such as HVAC, when you think about construction, being able to build different buildings and those type of things, and you have Wi-Fi sensors and all those other things inside of the enterprise, you have to be able to deploy some type of zero trust principles in order to ensure that those OT capabilities are properly secured as you transfer buildings over to different customers. So we've done a lot in that space, and we continue to lean forward, learn, and grow. But we have begun to execute on the zero trust principles and not just theoretically conceptualize some of those things as well. Over.
Really looking at the operational aspect of it, which I think is super important. I think about all the SCADA systems out there and all the things that you all have to deal with, and no question that the pipeline incident really highlights the importance of that critical infrastructure, locking it all down. Jim, how about over at Fortinet? You really have an opportunity there to stripe across a variety of communities there. Give us an example of a program that you'd like to highlight that's implementing a piece of this architecture.
So I'm going to actually riff on what Devarius said, which is how do you support the user and how do you operationalize this? We are asked to come in and help a major cabinet agency that has branch offices nationwide that even during COVID had not only work from home, but mobile users. And they had part of the agency had a law enforcement mission with investigative responsibilities that required going into dodgy places on the internet. So that assumption of compromise is true. So we had to find a way to help this agency do software-defined networking, allow these investigators to be on the dark web, and by implementing zero trust, work with the assumption that if your secured device got compromised, you could still turn around and work back on the agency network without allowing those threats to migrate upstream. That's the essence of zero trust for the field user.
Yeah, this whole issue of once you're breached, not having a clear path to be able to just sort of zing laterally, if you will, across the community and have your way, which we've seen numerous times, sadly, in a variety of incidences. So I'm glad to see that we're bolting all that down. I know ZTA really is a big proponent of making sure that we have those internal guardrails in place, so to speak. All right, we're going to talk about priorities. I want to start with you, Stephen, over at education, and give us your top couple of priorities for this year that you're working on in regards to zero trust architecture.
Absolutely. So I think I mentioned in the data space and the ICAM space where we're rocking solid. For us, the real opportunity on the horizon is around SaaS or SASE, depending on how you want to pronounce it. That's Secure Access Service Edge, and then also SOAR, security orchestration and automation, especially as it relates to our security operation. These two areas combined bring about 90% of a zero trust architecture into possibility. And when we think about those, we're really talking about two areas. We're talking about that idea of the control plane, and that's where a lot of that SaaS technology comes in. And the important part about the SaaS technology, and this is, someone mentioned Sean Connolly's name earlier. When we talk about, how do we really move the idea of the TIC? How do we move that into the cloud? Really, we're talking about SaaS. We're talking about moving the idea of a TICAP, which is a physical construct, into a virtual concept, which is now going to be in the cloud. And that's just a fundamental game changer. That combined with, for example, some of the endpoint client technology where guess what, end user, you're no longer using a VPN, at least in the way you think you are, because that client on the endpoint is going to handle almost all the encryption, and it's going to be done without your involvement and interaction. Wow, what a win for the end user. And that's really how we start selling zero trust, as it's not only good for the goose and the gander, it's going to make your job better and easier, because a lot of the security interruptions that you may feel you have now, they're frankly going to fade away. On the SOAR side, that gets into kind of that trust engine discussion. And how do we really start the orchestration and automation of actions, starting in the SOC, the react and response side, but then also as we start to bring on newer technologies like the software-defined technologies in the networking space, SOAR gives us the capability to say, wow, that's some funky behavior going on. Why is that asset getting scanned? Because frankly, it shouldn't, and we don't know where the heck that scan's coming from. Tell you what, let's direct that over to the honeynet and throw up a honeypot that looks at those ports that they're looking at, and let's see what they're doing. Let's see if we can capture some tools while we're at it. When we talk about SOAR and SaaS, those are the capabilities that we're bringing to the forefront. And for us in the next 2-3 years, that's really what we're going to be driving hard on.
And what a win-win, introducing all this great capability and also increasing the customer experience. Fantastic. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network.